What happens when a man has everything? A billion-dollar empire, a trophy girlfriend, and a wife he's about to throw away like yesterday's news. He slides the divorce papers across the marble table, a cruel smirk on his face, as he looks at his pregnant wife, mocking the child he refuses to acknowledge. He believes his ironclad prenup will leave her with nothing. He's so sure he's won. But in the cold, silent courtroom, a single document will change everything. A document that has waited in the dark silent as the grave her father's last will and testament. And what's written inside will not just give her justice. It will give her everything. The air in the penthouse was as thin and cold as the view from its floor-to-ceiling windows. 40 stories above Manhattan, the city lights glittered like a carpet of scattered diamonds, but inside the only sparkle came from the tear that traced a path down Elara Sterling's cheek. It dripped from her chin onto the top page of the thick document laid out on the glass coffee table. "Don't get sentimental now, Elara." Damian Blackwood's voice cut through the silence. It was a voice that commanded boardrooms and terrified competitors. A voice that had once whispered promises of forever in her ear. Now it was just another weapon in his arsenal. Tears don't increase the settlement amount. He stood by the fireplace, its gas flames dancing silently, casting no warmth. Dressed in a bespoke Tom Ford suit, he looked every bit the master of the universe the magazines proclaimed him to be. Damian Blackwood, the wunderkind of venture capital, the self-made billionaire who had clawed his way to the top. And Elara, he had decided, was dead weight. The document was a divorce settlement. Or more accurately, a declaration of her complete and utter erasure from his life. Their lawyer drafted prenuptial agreement, which she had signed in a haze of love and trust 2 years ago, was in his words a work of art. It protected every dollar, every stock option, every asset he had acquired before and during their marriage. It was designed to ensure that if this day ever came, she would walk away with little more than the clothes on her back and a one-time payment that was for a man of his stature insulting. "Just sign it," he said, his patience wearing thin. He checked his Patek Philippe watch, a gesture designed to remind her of how little his time was worth spending on her. Elara's hand trembled as she looked down at the papers. Her gaze drifted from the signature line to the slight, almost imperceptible swell of her stomach beneath her cashmere sweater. She was 3 months pregnant. Damian's child. A fact he treated not with joy or even responsibility, but with contempt. And the baby, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Damian let out a short, humorless laugh. "Don't be naive. You think getting pregnant was some kind of golden ticket, a little insurance policy. The prenup covers that too. There's a clause about unplanned eventualities. My lawyers are very thorough." He walked over and leaned down, his face close to hers, his cologne oud and arrogance assaulting her senses. "I'll provide the legal minimum for child support, an automatic transfer every month. You won't even have to talk to my assistant. But that's it. The child will not carry the Blackwood name, and it will have no claim on my estate. Is that clear?" Each word was a physical blow. This was the man who had held her, who had told her she was his anchor in a world of sharks. Now he was the shark, and she was the one bleeding in the water. "Why Damian?" She asked the question, feeling hollow and pointless, even as it left her lips. "What happened to us?" He straightened up, a look of profound boredom on his handsome face. "I evolved Elara. You didn't. I'm building an empire. I need a powerhouse by my side, not a gentle soul." He almost spat the last words, as if her kindness were a character flaw. "Chloe gets it. She understands the brand. Chloe Vance. The relentlessly ambitious social media influencer whose manufactured life was plastered all over Instagram. Chloe with her perfect body, her vapid captions about living your best life, and her claws sunk deep into Damian's ego. He wasn't just having an affair, he was upgrading as if Elara were a last-generation phone. He slid a pen across the glass table, a Mont Blanc, the one she had given him for their first anniversary. The irony was suffocating. My father. He's not well, Damien. The stress of this? Oh, here we go. He sighed, rolling his eyes. Arthur and his disappointment. Your father never liked me because I didn't come from old money. He saw me as a brute. Well, this brute built a billion-dollar company while he sat in his dusty library reading about the glory days. His opinion is as worthless as his portfolio. The cruelty of it stole her breath. Her father, Arthur Sterling, was a quiet, dignified man who had been battling a heart condition for the past year. His only crime had been to see the coldness in Damien that Elara had been blind to. He had warned her gently that Damien's ambition had no room for love. She hadn't listened. A new notification pinged on Damien's phone. He glanced at it, and the corner of his mouth lifted in a genuine smile. It was a smile she hadn't seen directed at her in months. Chloe's waiting. We have a reservation at Per Se. Sign the papers, Elara. Let's not drag this out. Something inside her snapped. The heartbreak, the humiliation, the fear, it all coalesced into a single moment of numb clarity. He was right. Dragging this out would only prolong her suffering. She was a Sterling. Her father had taught her about dignity, even in defeat. She picked up the pen. Her hand was steady now. The tremor was gone, replaced by an icy resolve. She would not let him see her crumble again. With a fluid, decisive stroke, she signed her name, Elara Sterling, on every line indicated. The ink was black and final. She pushed the stack of papers back toward him. There, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. You have what you want. Damien's smirk returned wider this time. He looked her up and down, his gaze lingering for a moment on her stomach with a flicker of distaste. Good girl, sensible for once. My lawyer will file these first thing in the morning. The court date should be a formality. The funds will be transferred within 24 hours of the judge's signature. My security will be here in an hour to escort you out. Your things are already packed. He didn't wait for a reply. He simply turned his back on her, on their marriage, on their unborn child, and strode out of the penthouse, leaving her alone in the silent, glittering cage he had built. As the heavy door clicked shut, Elara finally allowed herself to break. The sobs came ragged and raw, echoing in the vast empty space that was once her home. She was alone, pregnant, and she believed penniless. She had no idea that her father, in his quiet wisdom, had already set the chessboard for a game that had not yet begun. The hallway of the New York County Courthouse was a study in beige and anxiety. The air smelled of old paper floor polish and the faint metallic scent of desperation. It was a world away from the opulent penthouse, a place where lives were methodically dissected under the flat, unforgiving glare of fluorescent lights. Elara sat on a hard wooden bench, her hands clasped over her small baby bump, a subconscious gesture of protection. She wore a simple navy blue dress, her hair pulled back neatly. She looked understated and fragile, a pale ghost haunting these halls of judgment. Beside her sat Isabel Rossi, a lawyer in her late 30s, with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor that was at the moment Elara's only comfort. Isabel hadn't been hired by Elara, but appointed by the executors of her father's estate, a detail that Damien and his legal team had dismissed as irrelevant. Across the hall, the opposition held court. Damien Blackwood was a vision of corporate power, his charcoal suit perfectly tailored, his confidence radiating like a heatwave. He wasn't looking at Elara. He was scrolling through his phone, occasionally showing something to his lawyer, Marcus Thorne, who would chuckle obsequiously. Thorne was exactly the kind of lawyer you'd expect Damien to hire, slick, silver-haired, with a reputation for being a shark who enjoyed the taste of blood. They exuded an aura of absolute certainty. To them, this was not a trial. It was a procedural rubber stamping. The last bit of paperwork before Damien could officially install Chloe Vance into her new life. The past few weeks had been a blur of grief and fear for Elara. 2 days after she signed the divorce papers, she had received the call she had been dreading. Her father, Arthur Sterling, had passed away peacefully in his sleep. His heart, already weak, had finally given out. The grief was a physical weight, compounding the pain of her divorce. She had managed the funeral arrangements in a daze, leaning heavily on the quiet competence of her father's estate lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, who had then introduced her to Isabel Rossi. "He's not even looking at you," Isabel said softly, noticing Alara's gaze fixed on her husband. "That's a good thing. It means he underestimates you." "Let him." "He's not underestimating me, Isabel," Alara whispered back. "He's dismissing me. There's nothing to estimate. He has everything. The prenup is ironclad. His lawyer said so a dozen times." "Lawyers say many things," Isabel replied, her expression unreadable. "Let's just focus on the facts as they are presented in the room. Don't worry about what you think is going to happen." The courtroom doors opened, and a bailiff called out, "Blackwood versus Sterling. Courtroom 4B. Judge Rodriguez presiding." Damien and Marcus Thorne strode in first, like conquering heroes. Alara took a deep breath, placed a hand on her stomach, and followed with Isabel. The room was smaller than she'd imagined, panelled in dark wood that seemed to absorb all the light. At the front, on a raised dais, sat Judge Annabel Rodriguez. She was a woman in her 60s, with a stern face and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She looked over the documents before her, her expression neutral. "Please be seated," the bailiff droned. The proceedings began swiftly. Marcus Thorne stood up, his voice smooth and confident. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward dissolution of marriage. My client, Mr. Damien Blackwood, and Mrs. Alara Sterling have both agreed to the terms. A prenuptial agreement signed by both parties, with independent legal counsel present, is in place and governs the division of all assets. It's all very clear-cut. We are simply seeking the court's final approval to expedite the matter." He slid a copy of the prenup and the signed divorce settlement onto the clerk's desk. Judge Rodriguez put on her reading glasses and began to leaf through it. Damien leaned back in his chair, a picture of relaxed boredom. He caught Alara's eye for a brief second and gave her a pitying little smile, as if to say, "See painless. Now you can go back to whatever anonymous life you're destined for." Alara's heart pounded against her ribs. This was it, the final humiliation. In a few moments, the judge would bang her gavel, and her life with Damien would be legally over. She would be officially discarded. Judge Rodriguez looked up from the papers. "I see the terms. The one-time payment of $50,000 from Mr. Blackwood to Mrs. Sterling, no further claims on any business or personal assets, and a waiver of alimony. Is this correct?" "It is, Your Honor." Thorne confirmed. The judge turned her gaze to Alara. "Mrs. Sterling, you signed this agreement freely." Alara felt a lump form in her throat. She could see Damien watching her from the corner of his eye, daring her to make a scene. She thought of her father's lessons on dignity. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but clear in the silent room. "And you are currently represented by Ms. Isabel Rossi?" the judge asked, looking at Isabel. "I am, Your Honor," Isabel said, rising to her feet. Her presence was a stark contrast to Marcus Thorne's. Where he was slick, she was solid. Where he was theatrical, she was composed. "And you have no objections to the terms of this settlement, Ms. Rossi?" Judge Rodriguez asked. Damien smirked. This was the final hurdle. The lawyer for the penniless wife would, of course, have no objections. "Your Honor," Isabel began, her voice steady and clear, "we do not contest the validity of the prenuptial agreement as it pertains to the assets acquired during the marriage." A slight, almost imperceptible shift in the room's atmosphere. Marcus Thorne's smile tightened. What game was this? However, Isabel continued, "A significant event has occurred since the signing of this divorce settlement that has fundamentally altered my client's financial standing. An event that we believe is material to these proceedings." Damien leaned forward, whispering to Thorne, "What the hell is she talking about?" Thorne just gave a slight shake of his head. His eyes narrowed. Judge Rodriguez looked over her glasses. And what event would that be? Counselor Isabel Rossi held up a thick, leather-bound document. The death of my client's father, Mr. Arthur Sterling, and the subsequent reading of his last will and testament. I have a certified copy here, which was entered into probate yesterday. With the court's permission, I would like to present the relevant portions of this will as they directly impact Mrs. Sterling's current and future financial status, and therefore the context of this divorce. A murmur went through the small public gallery. Damien stared, his smugness finally replaced by a flicker of confusion. A will? What could that possibly have to do with him? Old man Sterling probably left her a collection of dusty books and a moth-eaten sweater. Marcus Thorne stood up again. Objection, Your Honor. This is irrelevant. The prenup is explicit. It precludes any and all claims, including future inheritances, from being considered marital property. Whatever her father left her is hers, of course, but it has no bearing on the dissolution of this marriage or the terms already agreed upon. Judge Rodriguez looked from Thorne to Rossi. She tapped a pen on her desk, a thoughtful, rhythmic sound. Normally, Mr. Thorne, I would agree with you. An inheritance is typically separate property. However, Ms. Rossi used the word material. I'm intrigued. The timing is, notable. She looked at Isabel. I'll allow it. But be warned, Counselor, this had better be relevant or I will not be pleased. Thank you. Your Honor, Isabel said. I assure you it is more relevant than Mr. Blackwood could possibly imagine. She walked to the clerk's desk and handed over the will. As Judge Rodriguez began to read, Ilara felt a strange fluttering of hope in her chest. It was a foreign feeling, one she hadn't experienced in a long time. She didn't know what was in her father's will, but she knew her father, and she knew he had loved her more than anything in this world. Across the room, Damien Blackwood watched a frown now etched on his perfect face. The first crack in his perfect day had appeared. A hush fell over the courtroom as Judge Rodriguez adjusted her spectacles and began to examine the document Isabel Rossi had provided. It was not a flimsy piece of paper, but a weighty, leather-bound folio tied with a ribbon bearing the seal of a prestigious old-world law firm, Abernathy Finch and Associates. The very sight of it was an affront to Damien's sleek, modern world of digital contracts and ruthless efficiency. The last will and testament of Arthur B. Sterling, Judge Rodriguez, announced, her voice formal. She scanned the preliminary pages, her expression unreadable. Damien leaned toward his lawyer, Marcus Thorne. This is a farce, he hissed, his voice a low growl. A delay tactic. Arthur's entire estate is probably worth less than the car I drive. What's the point of this theatre? Thorne, for the first time, looked slightly uneasy. He had built his career on predictable outcomes, on crushing opponents with the sheer weight of his client's wealth. Unforeseen variables like this unnerved him. Let her play her hand, Damien. The judge is indulging her. It will lead nowhere. The prenup is a fortress. Ilara's mind, however, drifted away from the cold courtroom. The sight of the document, the mention of her father's name, sent her spiraling back into a memory so vivid it felt like yesterday. It was 6 months ago, a warm autumn afternoon. The leaves in the garden of her father's Westchester home were a riot of gold and crimson. She and Arthur were sitting on the porch drinking iced tea. Her father looked frailer than she'd ever seen him, the book resting in his lap unread. He had been quiet for a long time before he finally spoke. Ilara, he'd said, his voice soft but firm. I need to talk to you about Damien. She had tensed immediately. Dad, please don't. Just listen, he insisted gently. I see the way he looks at you sometimes, or rather the way he doesn't. He looks through you. A man in love, a true partner, sees the person he loves. Damien sees a reflection of his own success, an accessory. That's not true, she had argued, though a part of her knew he was right. He's just driven. His work is demanding. Arthur had sighed, a weary, knowing sound. There is a difference between a man who is driven and a man who will drive over anyone to get what he wants. I have spent my life studying not just books, but people. People, my dear. Men like Damien Blackwood don't build things. They conquer them. And once they have conquered something, they lose interest. I worry about what happens when he decides he has conquered you. Tears had welled in her eyes. What am I supposed to do? Her father reached across and took her hand. His skin was thin and papery, but his grip was strong. You do nothing for now. You are a sterling. You carry yourself with grace always. But know this, I have seen this coming, and I have made provisions. I will not always be here to protect you, but my love for you will be. I've made sure of that. Whatever happens, promise me, you will remember your own strength. It is greater than you know. He had tapped the side of his leather briefcase. Everything is taken care of. Everything. A voice pulled her back to the present. It was Judge Rodriguez. Ms. Rossi, you stated that only certain portions of this will are relevant. Please direct me to them. Of course, Your Honor, Isabel said, her composure unwavering. Please turn to Article 4, Section A, Bequests of Personal and Real Property. The room was silent, save for the rustle of paper. Damien tapped his fingers on the table, an impatient rhythm of contempt. He caught Ilara looking at him and mouthed the word pathetic. I am there, the judge said. Please read subsection I, Your Honor, Isabel instructed. Judge Rodriguez cleared her throat and read aloud. To my beloved daughter, Ilara Sterling, I bequeath the entirety of my personal library, including all first editions and my collection of antique maps, in the hopes that she continues to find wonder in the world. A low, derisive snort came from Damien's side of the room. Books and maps. It was exactly as pathetic as he'd predicted. Marcus Thorne relaxed slightly, a smirk returning to his face. Is this your material evidence, Ms. Rossi? Thorne interjected, his voice dripping with sarcasm. A collection of dusty old paper. Patience, Mr. Thorne, the judge cautioned, her eyes still on the will. There's more. Subsection 2. She continued reading. I bequeath the property located at 157 West 74th Street, a brownstone in Manhattan, to my dear friend and lawyer, Charles Abernathy, as thanks for a lifetime of loyal service. Damien almost laughed out loud. He was giving away property to his lawyer. The old man really was a fool. And now, Your Honor. Isabel's voice cut through his thoughts, sharp and precise. If you would be so kind as to read subsection he. There was a subtle shift in Judge Rodriguez's posture. She leaned closer to the document. The courtroom held its breath. She began to read, her voice slow and deliberate. Regarding the property commonly known as Penthouse B at 40 Central Park South, currently the primary residence of my daughter Ilara and her husband, Damien Blackwood. At the mention of his own address, Damien sat bolt upright. Every ounce of boredom and arrogance evaporated, replaced by a sudden sharp alarm. What was this? He owned that penthouse. He had the deed. He'd paid $32 million for it. Judge Rodriguez continued, her voice echoing in the stunned silence. This property is and has always been legally owned by the Sterling Family Trust, established by my great-grandfather in 1922. The trust leased this property to Mr. Damien Blackwood 2 years ago for a symbolic sum of $1 per annum. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Ilara's own breath caught in her throat. She looked at Isabel, her eyes wide with disbelief. Damien was on his feet. That's a lie. That's impossible. I bought that apartment. I have the records, the deed of sale. Mr. Blackwood, sit down. Judge Rodriguez commanded, her voice like cracking ice. You will have your turn to speak. Marcus Thorne was scrambling, whispering urgently to his client. Damien, what is she talking about? The purchase documents. They were real. Damien insisted, his face turning a blotchy red. The judge ignored him and kept reading from the will, her voice ringing with authority. The aforementioned lease agreement contains a single binding condition that it remains valid only for the duration of the legal marriage between Damien Blackwood and my daughter, Ilara Sterling. In the event of a legal divorce, dissolution, or separation for any reason, the lease is immediately and irrevocably terminated. The judge paused, looking up over her glasses first at Damien, then at Elara. The shadow of Arthur Sterling, the quiet man with his dusty books, now loomed over the entire room. And then she read the final sentence of the section. Upon termination, full and unencumbered possession of the property, along with all its contents, fixtures and furnishings paid for by the trust, which for the record is all of them, reverts to the sole beneficiary of the Sterling Family Trust, my daughter, Elara Sterling. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb having just detonated. Damien Blackwood, the man who thought he was kicking his wife out onto the street, had just been informed that he was in fact a guest in her home. A guest whose welcome had just officially expired. The courtroom felt like a vacuum, all the air sucked out by the judge's words. Damien Blackwood stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. The blood had drained from it, leaving his skin a pasty white that clashed with his expensive tan. This is preposterous, he finally stammered, his voice cracking. He turned on his lawyer. Thorne, what is this? He can't do that. I signed a mountain of paperwork. I wired the money. Marcus Thorne, for the first time in his professional life, looked utterly flummoxed. He was shuffling through his own files, his hands trembling slightly. I don't understand. The title company, the deed, everything was clear. Isabel Rossi stood calm amidst the chaos her revelation had caused. If Mr. Thorne checks his records more carefully, she said, addressing the judge but making sure Damien heard every word, he will find that his client signed a purchase agreement, not with the building's developer, but with a holding company named Argentum Holdings LLC. Damien's eyes widened. He remembered the name. It was just one of a dozen shell corporations he dealt with. A faceless entity in a complex transaction. Argentum, Isabel continued, her tone educational, is the Latin word for silver. A more common synonym for silver is, of course, sterling. Argentum Holdings is, and always has been, the primary asset management arm of the Sterling Family Trust. Mr. Blackwood didn't buy the penthouse. He paid $32 million into a trust of which his wife is the sole beneficiary in exchange for a lease he clearly didn't bother to read the fine print of. It was in essence the most expensive rental application in New York history. A few people in the gallery failed to stifle their gasps. Elara herself felt dizzy. She remembered Damien boasting about the penthouse, how he'd stolen it for a bargain price from some anonymous foreign investor who needed to offload it quickly. It had all been a lie, a carefully constructed stage set by her father. Your Honor, this is fraud, Thorne bellowed, finally finding his voice. We were misled. Mr. Sterling created a fraudulent transaction. Judge Rodriguez looked down at him with cold disdain. Counselor, are you accusing a deceased man of fraud based on your client's failure to perform due diligence? Mr. Sterling, through his trust, owned the property. He was entitled to lease it under any terms he saw fit. If your client was so blinded by what he thought was a good deal that he failed to read a multi-million-dollar contract, that is not the court's problem, nor is it fraud. It's simply a bad bargain. Damien sank back into his chair, as if his strings had been cut. The penthouse, his palace in the sky, the symbol of his dominance over the city. It was hers. The Tom Ford suits in the closet, the custom Italian furniture, the multi-million-dollar art on the walls he'd bragged about curating, all of it belonged to her. He had paid for it all, only to hand it to the woman he was trying to discard. The security guards he had arranged to escort her out would now be escorting him out. The humiliation was a physical thing, burning in his gut. He stared across the room at Elara. The fragile, pathetic woman was looking at her hands, a single tear rolling down her cheek. But it wasn't a tear of sadness. He could see it now. It was a tear of overwhelming, shocking relief. She wasn't looking at him with hatred. She wasn't looking at him at all. It was as if he was becoming insignificant right before her eyes. "Is that all, Ms. Rossi?" Judge Rodriguez asked, her voice betraying a hint of morbid curiosity. "Was the matter of the residence your only point?" Damien prayed it was. He could survive this. He'd lose the apartment a blow to his ego and his wallet, but he was still Damien Blackwood. He still had his empire, Blackwood Capital. He had built that with his own two hands, with his own genius. No one could take that away from him. "No, Your Honor," Isabel said, her voice dropping a little, becoming graver. "That was merely the prelude. Please direct your attention to Article 5 of the Will Disposition of Business Assets." Damien's blood ran cold. Business assets. What? Business assets? Arthur Sterling was a retired academic. He dabbled in a few blue-chip stocks, nothing more. He knew nothing of the cutthroat world of venture capital. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, you may want to pay close attention to this part." Thorne, looking rattled, nodded stiffly. Isabel directed the judge. "Section A, subsection I, Your Honor." Judge Rodriguez found the page. She read it silently, first, her eyebrows climbing higher and higher up her forehead. After a long moment, she looked up, her gaze fixed on Damien Blackwood with an expression of pure astonishment. She then cleared her throat and read aloud. "Regarding my investments in the technology and financial sectors managed through various holding companies and private equity firms." Damien's heart began to hammer against his ribs. This was impossible. The judge's voice was steady and clear. "I hereby direct my executor to consolidate all shares and controlling interests from the following entities: Phoenix Investment Group, Bedrock Financial Services, and Oracle Seed Funding, LLC." The names hit Damien like a series of physical punches. Those weren't just random firms. They were the three angel investors who had given him his start. The mysterious silent partners who had provided the high-risk seed capital for his very first venture, a data analytics company he had sold for $150 million. That sale had been the foundation of his entire fortune, the money he had used to launch Blackwood Capital. He had always believed them to be three separate shrewd investors who saw his genius. He had never met them. The deals were handled through lawyers and wire transfers. Isabel Rossi provided the narrative. "Your Honor, as the will attests, and the accompanying corporate documents will prove these three entities were shell corporations. All of them were established and solely funded by one man." "No," Damien whispered. The word was a choked, desperate sound. "No, no, no." Judge Rodriguez delivered the final blow, reading directly from Arthur Sterling's will. "These three entities, which I created for the sole purpose of investing in my son-in-law's early endeavors, are to be dissolved. Their combined assets, which constitute a 51% majority ownership stake in the parent company known as Blackwood Capital Holdings, are to be unified under the Sterling estate." The room erupted. Marcus Thorne shot to his feet, shouting, "Objection! Objection! This is inconceivable." But no one was listening to him. Damien was staring into space, his mind reeling, trying to process the enormity of what he had just heard. His self-made empire, his genius, his ruthless climb to the top. It was all a sham. He hadn't been a conqueror. He had been a pet project, funded from the very beginning by the quiet, bookish man he had so openly despised. Arthur Sterling hadn't just given him a leg up. He had built the entire ladder, let Damien climb it, and held the deed to it the entire time. The 51% controlling interest. That meant he wasn't the owner of his company. He was a minority shareholder, an employee. He looked at Elara again. She was staring at him now, her expression a mixture of shock, pity, and something else. Something that looked terrifyingly like power. The gentle soul he had mocked was now the heir to the kingdom he thought was his. His house of cards, built on a foundation of arrogance and deceit, had just been blown away by the last will and testament of a dead man. And the worst part, the part that was making it hard for him to breathe, was the chilling realization that this probably wasn't even the end of it. Damien Blackwood felt the world tilt on its axis. The wood-paneled courtroom seemed to warp and bend at the edges of his vision. 51%. The number echoed in the sudden ringing silence of his mind. It was a death sentence to the man he had built himself up to be. The media articles, the magazine covers, the fawning acolytes, all of it was based on a lie. He was not the master of Blackwood Capital. He was its largest, most oblivious employee. Arthur Sterling, the man he'd dismissed as a relic, had been playing a game of chess so long and so subtle that Damien hadn't even known he was a pawn on the board. Every boast he'd ever made, every lecture he'd given about being a self-made man, now replayed in his head as a humiliating farce. He could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on him, not with admiration, but with a kind of morbid, schadenfreude-fueled pity. He was a joke. His fall from grace was not just a legal proceeding, it was a public spectacle. Marcus Thorne was trying to regain control, sputtering legal jargon, like a car engine failing to start. Your Honor, we will contest this. We will challenge the provenance of these shell corporations. We will file for discovery. This is a hostile takeover from beyond the grave. Judge Rodriguez looked at him, unmoved. You may file whatever you wish, Mr. Thorne, but the documents Ms. Rossi has provided appear to be meticulously organized, notarized and cross-referenced. Corporate registration papers, shareholder agreements, original wire transfer receipts. It seems Mr. Sterling was an exceptionally thorough man. She turned a page in the will, and it appears we still haven't reached the conclusion of Article 5. Damien's head snapped up. There was more. What else could there possibly be? The man had taken his home, his company. What was left, his dignity, was already in shreds on the courtroom floor. Isabel Rossi's voice was calm, but it carried the weight of an executioner's pronouncement. If you would please read Section B, Your Honor. It's titled, Conditions of Inheritance. The judge's eyes scanned the text. The courtroom waited collectively, holding its breath. Elara herself felt a sense of surreal detachment, as if she were watching a play about someone else's life. Her father had done all this, the quiet man who taught her how to identify constellations and read Latin. It was almost impossible to reconcile the man she knew with the strategic corporate titan described in this will. Then, Judge Rodriguez began to read Section B aloud. Her voice was flat, clinical, which only served to amplify the brutal elegance of Arthur Sterling's final move. The 51% controlling interest in Blackwood Capital Holdings shall not pass directly to my daughter, Elara Sterling. For a fleeting, insane moment, a spark of hope ignited in Damien's chest. Was this a reprieve? Was the old man going to bequeath it to a charity or dissolve the company? Anything was better than it being in her hands. He could fight a board, a charity. He could rebuild. The judge continued extinguishing that hope with the next sentence. Instead, this controlling interest, its shares, its voting rights, and all dividends and profits accrued from it shall be placed into a newly formed, irrevocable trust, the Sterling Future Trust. A trust. It was always a trust with these old money families. Damien's mind raced. Who would be the beneficiary? Who would be the trustee? Judge Rodriguez kept reading each word, a hammer blow building a prison of clauses around Damien. The sole beneficiary of the Sterling Future Trust is to be my firstborn grandchild from my daughter, Elara. The assets will be held in this trust until the beneficiary reaches the age of 25, at which point they will inherit the controlling interest outright. Soms, the air was knocked from Damien's lungs. His child, the baby he had mocked, the unplanned eventuality he had dismissed and disowned. That child was now poised to be the majority shareholder of his entire life's work. The irony was so potent, so vicious, it was almost poetic. His scorn, his cruelty, his dismissal of his own offspring had been transformed by a dead man into the ultimate checkmate. But Arthur Sterling wasn't finished. There was one final masterful twist of the knife. The judge read the last and most important sentence of the article. Until the beneficiary comes of age, sole and absolute authority over the Sterling Future Trust, including full, unimpeded voting rights on all corporate matters, the power to appoint board members, to set executive compensation, and to direct the company's strategic vision, shall be vested in one person. And she paused and looked up from the will directly at Elara, who was now weeping silently, her hands protectively wrapped around her stomach. The sole trustee, Judge Rodriguez concluded, her voice echoing in the chamber, shall be the child's mother, my daughter, Elara Sterling. It was done. Damian Blackwood didn't just lose his company to his unborn child. He lost it to Elara. She was now, for all intents and purposes, his boss. She could fire him. She could slash his salary. She could sell the company out from under him. The gentle soul he had deemed unfit to be his partner was now the undisputed master of his fate. He finally looked at her, truly looked at her. The woman he had seen as weak and sentimental was now imbued with a power so absolute it terrified him. Her tears were not tears of weakness anymore. They were a baptism. She was being reborn in this courtroom, forged in grief and betrayal into something new, something formidable. The mockery he had hurled at her just days ago came screaming back to him. You think getting pregnant was some kind of golden ticket? It turned out it was. Not just a golden ticket, but the deed to the entire chocolate factory. The courtroom, which had been a place of quiet tension, now felt like the epicenter of an earthquake. The final clause of the will hung in the air, a stunning, brutal declaration of war from a man already in his grave. Elara Sterling was the trustee. She held all the power. Damian Blackwood finally broke. The carefully constructed facade of the invincible billionaire shattered into a million pieces. He shot up from his chair, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage and disbelief. No. The word was a primal scream torn from his throat. It was the sound of a king discovering his crown was made of cardboard and his castle was a sandcastle, just as the tide came in. No, he can't do that. You can't let him do that. This is my company. I built it. Me. He pointed a trembling finger at Elara, his eyes wild. She knows nothing about venture capital. She can barely balance a checkbook. She'll run it into the ground. This is insane. Judge Rodriguez slammed her gavel down, the sharp crack echoing like a gunshot. Mr. Blackwood, control yourself, or I will have you removed for contempt of court. But Damian was beyond reason. He was a cornered animal. He rounded on his lawyer, grabbing Marcus Thorne by the lapels of his expensive suit. Fix this, Thorne. This is what I pay you for. Fix it. Thorne, pale and sweating, tried to pry Damian's hands off him. Damian, calm down. We will appeal. We will litigate. This won't stand. But his words lacked conviction. He knew, as did everyone in the room, that the will was a masterpiece of legal fortification. Arthur Sterling and his lawyers had anticipated every possible challenge. There's nothing to fix, Damian roared, shoving Thorne away. He turned his desperate, pleading gaze to the judge. Your Honor, you see what he's done? He did this out of spite, because he never thought I was good enough for his daughter. Judge Rodriguez looked down at him from her dais, her expression one of utter steel. What I see, Mr. Blackwood, is a meticulously crafted legal document, a last will and testament that appears to be perfectly valid. Mr. Sterling was the majority shareholder of your company. He was entitled to bequeath his property to whomever he wished under whatever conditions he chose. His motivations are not for this court to determine, only the legality of his actions. She then turned her gaze to Elara, whose silent tears had subsided. In their place was a look of profound, earth-shattering shock, but underneath it a new strength was beginning to kindle. She sat straighter. Her hand still on her stomach seemed less a gesture of protection and more one of possession. She and her child were a unit, a force. Ms. Sterling, the judge's voice softened fractionally. This is a significant change in circumstances. The original divorce settlement, which granted you $50,000, was signed when you believed yourself to be of limited means and dependent on Mr. Blackwood's generosity. A bitter, hysterical laugh escaped Damien's lips at the word generosity. Given that you are now the primary stakeholder and trustee controlling Mr. Blackwood's main source of income and wealth, the judge continued, the terms of that settlement seem inadequate and, frankly, absurd. Isabel Rossi stood. Your Honor, in light of these revelations, we wish to withdraw our acceptance of the previous settlement. We will be filing a new proposal. No need, Counselor, Judge Rodriguez said, a flicker of something almost like a smile touching her lips. I believe we can settle this here and now. The prenuptial agreement was designed to protect Mr. Blackwood's assets from any claim by Miss Sterling. It is now clear that the majority of those assets were never truly his to protect. In fact, the financial power in this relationship is now, and will be for the foreseeable future, completely reversed. She looked at Damien, who was now slumped in his chair, defeated, and broken his face, buried in his hands. Mr. Blackwood, the judge said, her voice ringing with finality, your prenuptial agreement is valid. It protects your assets. As of this moment, those assets consist of a minority share in Blackwood Capital, some personal savings, and a few cars. You are, as per your own agreement, entitled to keep all of that. Mrs. Sterling will make no claim on it. It was the ultimate insult. His own weapon, the prenup he was so proud of, was being used to grant him the scraps from his own table. As for the matter of child support, the judge continued, given that the child is the beneficiary of a trust that effectively owns the company Mr. Blackwood works for, and that Mrs. Sterling is the trustee, I believe she is more than capable of providing for the child. Therefore, no child support will be required from Mr. Blackwood. She was cutting every last tie, leaving him utterly at his ex-wife's mercy. He wasn't even a father in the eyes of the court anymore, just a minority shareholder. The divorce is granted, Judge Rodriguez declared, her voice resonating with authority. She signed the papers with a flourish. Based on the evidence presented today, the penthouse at 40 Central Park South is the sole property of Mrs. Sterling. Mr. Blackwood will vacate the premises within 24 hours. She banged the gavel. This court is adjourned. The sound echoed through the room. It was over. As people began to file out, Damien remained in his chair, a hollowed-out shell of the man who had walked in that morning. Marcus Thorne mumbled something about appeals and disappeared, likely to distance himself from the biggest professional humiliation of his career. Elara slowly rose to her feet, aided by Isabel. She looked across the room at the man who had been her husband. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a toxic cocktail of hatred, fear, and a pathetic plea for mercy. He saw a stranger. The quiet, gentle woman was gone. In her place stood the trustee of the Sterling Future Trust, the keeper of his destiny, the mother of the child who owned him. Without a word, she turned her back on him and walked out of the courtroom, leaving him alone with the ruins of the empire he had never really owned. The weeks that followed the courtroom detonation were a blur of seismic shifts. Damien Blackwood's spectacular downfall became the stuff of legend on Wall Street and in the gossip columns. The story was too delicious to ignore the self-made titan, unmasked as a trust fund project, dethroned by the pregnant wife he had mocked and discarded. His humiliation was swift and total. The first call he received was from Chloe Vance. Her voice, usually dripping with syrupy adoration, was brittle and cold. "Damien, darling," she had said, "I'm seeing these awful things online. They can't be true, can they?" "Chloe, listen." He had pleaded, his voice raspy. "It's a complication. My lawyers are handling it. It's a temporary setback." "A temporary setback," she'd scoffed. "They're saying your ex-wife owns your company, that you've been kicked out of your penthouse." My agent just called. My brand is built on aspiration, on success. I can't be associated with this. The call ended. A few hours later, her Instagram feed was wiped clean of every picture of him, replaced by a post about cutting out toxic energy and embracing my own girl boss power. She had abandoned the sinking ship with the ruthless efficiency he had once admired. His professional life disintegrated just as quickly. He showed up at the Blackwood Capital offices the Monday after the hearing, intending to rally his troops to project an image of control. He found the locks had been changed. A memo had been circulated by the newly appointed interim board, a board appointed by Isabel Rossi on behalf of Alara Sterling. It stated that Mr. Blackwood was on an indefinite leave of absence. His company email was deactivated, his access to the corporate accounts frozen. He was in effect locked out of his own life. Meanwhile, Ilara moved not with vengeance, but with quiet, deliberate purpose. She didn't return to the cold, opulent penthouse. She had the entire contents professionally inventoried and put into storage, then listed the property for sale. The proceeds went directly into the Sterling Future Trust. It was a place of ghosts and pain, and she wanted a fresh start. She moved into her father's beautiful, warm home in Westchester, the one with the porch and the garden full of memories. She spent her days walking among the trees, reading the books from his library, and taking calls from Isabel and a team of financial advisors her father's law firm had assembled. They were amazed by her. They had expected a grieving, overwhelmed young woman, and she was those things. But she was also her father's daughter. She listened intently, asked sharp, insightful questions, and made decisions with a calm resolve that belied her lack of experience. She wasn't interested in the cutthroat world of venture capital, but she understood her primary duty to protect and grow her child's inheritance. Her first official act as trustee was to conduct a full independent audit of Blackwood Capital. Her second was to install a new, highly respected CEO, a veteran woman from the industry, known for her ethical approach to business. Damien adrift and hemorrhaging, what little was left of his money on legal fees for appeals that were instantly dismissed, was finally forced to do the unthinkable. He had to request a meeting with her. She agreed to see him, not in a boardroom, but on the porch of her father's house. The same porch where Arthur had warned her about Damien's character. He arrived, looking diminished. His suit was still expensive, but it hung on him differently. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a gaunt desperation. He looked at her, at the gentle swell of her stomach, which was now more pronounced. "Ilara," he began, his voice hoarse. I need my job back. I can be an asset to the company. I know the portfolio better than anyone." She looked at him, her expression calm. "The company is in good hands, Damien. It's being restructured. The culture of fear you created is being dismantled. We're focusing on long-term sustainable growth, not reckless conquests." "But it's my name on the door," he protested weakly. "For now," she said softly, "the new board is considering a rebranding, something that better reflects the new corporate values." That was the final twist of the knife. He would not only lose his power and his wealth, but his very name would be erased from his own legacy. "What do you want from me?" he finally asked, his voice breaking. "Revenge. Do you want to ruin me completely?" Ilara was silent for a long moment, watching a cardinal land on a nearby bird feeder. "I used to think my father was a quiet, gentle scholar." "Damien," she said, her voice thoughtful. "And he was, but he also understood that the world has monsters in it. He didn't build me a shield to hide behind. He built me a fortress and handed me the keys. He didn't do it for revenge. He did it so that I would be safe, so that his grandchild would be safe." She finally looked at him, and for the first time he saw not a victim, but a queen. "I don't want anything from you," she said, her voice filled with a profound and unshakable peace. "And that is my power. You are irrelevant to me, Damien. You are irrelevant to my child's future. You are just a minority shareholder. You'll receive your dividends like everyone else. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a nursery to plan." She stood up and walked back into the house, leaving him alone on the porch as the sun began to set. He was a ghost in her world now. A footnote in the story of the Sterling legacy, a legacy that would be carried on not by him, but by the child he had so cruelly cast aside. Alara Sterling, the woman he had tried to break, had inherited the earth. And so Damien Blackwood, the man who thought he ruled the world, learned the hardest lesson of all. That true power isn't about the money you make, but the legacy you build. And the quiet, dignified love of a father for his daughter built a legacy that was stronger than any corporation. Alara Sterling didn't just win a divorce. She reclaimed her life, her dignity, and a future for her child that was brighter than any Manhattan penthouse. Her story is a powerful reminder that strength can be found in the quietest souls, and that sometimes the greatest fortresses are the ones we cannot see. Karma, as they say, has a way of balancing the books in the end. What did you think of Arthur Sterling's ultimate plan? Was it justice, or was it the perfect revenge? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable real-life dramas. Thank you for listening.